So welcome to the new episode of Building the Open Web episode. Today we have Maria from Electric. Maybe you can give us a brief introduction.
Yeah, thanks for having me. My name is Maria. I'm an investor on the Electric Capital team. And, before joining Electric, I was a founder and CTO of a supply chain company. Prior to that, I worked on search at Microsoft as a product manager. And my background is in computer science. So I have a master's in computer science and studied that in college as well.
Cool. Sounds good. Maybe we can start with your background, starting from where you grew up.
Yeah, sure. So I was actually born in Beijing, and so I moved to the United States, and had to go through the whole process of learning English as well.
Nice. And were you exposed to entrepreneurship early on?
Yeah, absolutely. So, as I mentioned, we did have to immigrate from China to the United States. I immigrated with my mother, and she was a single mother, kind of struggling to make ends meet. And so, for the most part, we grew up pretty poor. So, we were a household that was making less than $20,000 a year. And I watched my mother build a company from scratch. It started as a survival instinct. It was to keep us afloat. And she actually ended up expanding it into one of the biggest Asian food distribution businesses in the San Francisco area. So I grew up in a household where I didn't see anyone who took weekends off. My mother always told me that everyone has the same 24 hours in a day. And so, you just have to make that as productive as possible. She is at retirement age. So she's still running very hard at her business. I think growing up in that environment really normalized what it meant to start a business and normalized what it meant to work hard. I did start an education company when I was in college. And then after I was at Microsoft and after I got my master's in computer science, I started another company in the supply chain space.
And back in college, what were your passions at the time?
It was writing, actually. So I went into college thinking that I was going to be a novelist. I even went to boarding school as an art school, and I fell into computer science completely by accident. Up until the point where I took my first CS class, I knew how to open a Word document and I knew how to go to Wikipedia, go to Google, and that was pretty much it. So I took my first CS class just for fun because it was entirely out of my wheelhouse, and I ended up loving it. I think computer science is one of those things that forces you to think about things very atomically. You have to understand everything at the atomic level to be able to build it back up. And so it was a very different frame of thinking from my mostly liberal arts background, which was most about thinking about the big picture, thinking about problems holistically. Then I ended up getting very into it and actually made that my career.
And how did you decide to join Microsoft post-graduation?
It was an easy decision for me. I joined as a PM, not really knowing what it was. Mostly it was someone who told me that this is like being CEO of a product. And I was like, done. That's exactly what I want to be. Um, so I think from that perspective, it was a very easy decision.
And so this experience, what did it give you perspective on overall?
So I was put in a very unique position being there. I actually think if you are a PM at a big tech company and you are starting off, you are actually, in reality, not the CEO of a product. And that's kind of a lie, right? But I actually did end up getting a very interesting experience in that I was put on, when I joined, they had just put out Windows 8.1 and we're starting to think about Windows 10. And so I joined at just the right time where they were just talking about ideating on it. And so my feature became search inside Windows 10. So I worked on autosuggest. And if you have Windows 10 and you open up the start menu today and you type something to start searching, that was the feature that I worked on. And I actually got to work on that from the very beginning. I put together the first presentation on what it was going to look like and then iterated through that all the way to release. And now, over 1 billion machines are running Windows 10. And so it was a very unique product to work on. It was a very unique experience inside Microsoft itself.
And how did you make transition into entrepreneurship? Was it during the masters or in Microsoft you decided that you want to make a change?
Yeah, so what had happened is after I worked on Windows 10 and after that shipped, I knew I wanted to start my own company, but I didn't know what I wanted to do and what I wanted to start my company in. So, like most young people who don't know what to do with their lives, I went to grad school. And part of that decision was also I wanted to take that time to interact with more people, kind of see what was on the cutting edge of CS, and actually have some time to experiment while I'm learning, and maybe create some kind of like positive feedback loop where what I'm learning is also informing what I'm building as well. So that's basically exactly what happened. I went to grad school, and while I was in grad school, I decided to open a consulting company. So one of the problems early on that I was really fascinated by was issues in the supply chain, because growing up, my mother was in that business, and so I knew that there were a lot of issues. I knew that it was a very low tech business, and that there were a lot of ways that it could be made very, very efficient. And so, but that's, that was at that point, it was a very general idea. It was not a business plan. It was not product. It was not a solution. And in fact, I didn't even have a problem. I just knew this was a problem space. So what I ended up doing in grad school was, I wanted to answer the question, how do I narrow down my focus? How do I actually figure out what to build my company around? So the thing that I really needed to do was learn more about what the problem was, what the problems were, learn more about how people were actually tackling issues today, how small businesses were manufacturing their products today, what problems they're facing. So I opened up a consulting company to help small businesses launch their physical products, and I managed their entire supply chain for them. And this was in 2015. So this was the era where direct to consumer brands were really starting to hit mainstream product market fit. So you had things like Casper and Warby Parker and Stitch Fix. And so a lot of small businesses were coming on board, selling directly to their users through Instagram. And they were in many, they were marketing geniuses, and they were very, very good at reaching their users, but not as experienced in actually creating the product. And so in doing this consulting company, I worked with over 50 small businesses. It gave me a sense of the types of products that people were building, the types of friction that existed in building each different types of products, and it allowed me to narrow down the problem significantly. So I started off the business. I started off, servicing businesses that made everything from electronics to accessories to apparel, and very quickly, narrowed that down to, okay, I want to tackle something in the apparel space. It's the biggest market. It's the lowest barrier to entry. There are a lot more customers there, and so, that's just kind of one example of what doing that allowed me to focus on.
What were some of the main learnings of this period?
I think the main learning is that you just have to learn by doing. Like, you can do all the research that you want. You can look things up, but talking to actual potential users, getting in the weeds with them, like in my case, I was literally building products alongside these businesses and like shipping their products for them. That allowed me to learn what their problems were much better than just even interviewing them, right? And so once I ended up launching my business, Bambify, we had a massive influx of users, and people found it very helpful right off the bat. And it was because that I was very clear on what the problem was that I was solving.
So, how did the business actually progress from there as Bombify started?
So basically, after I graduated from grad school, I decided this was the time to turn my consulting company into an actual scalable business. Like, a consulting company is not scalable, and I wanted to create a big business. I wanted to create a tech business. So the first thing I did was I recruited a co-founder, and my co-founder ended up being one of my customers when I was running this consulting business. He had a lot of experience in terms of what it meant to be a small business creating products. And so the first product that we pushed out was a marketplace to connect small businesses with premium manufacturers around the world. And so we focused on Japan, we focused on Latin America, we focused on Europe, we focused on Korea, basically bringing, a lot of small businesses struggled with working with very quality manufacturers. So we brought that as the first solution to them.
How did you go about acquiring the small businesses as customers?
The problem actually wasn't acquiring small businesses as customers. The problem was acquiring the manufacturers. So basically, the demand side was there. There was massive amount of demand, and you can see that from even just going on, like, a site that a lot of people use was Alibaba.com. If you go on Alibaba.com, which is not a good experience, by any means, a lot of people still use that to source manufacturers. And so we were like, well, the bar is very low, so we just need to create an experience that's better than this, and people are very hungry for that kind of experience. But then the biggest question is, okay, so then how do you source really great manufacturers? And in our case, what we thought about and what we learned is that there are a lot of very quality manufacturers, but they are, they have trouble reaching the US. Manufacturers are very low tech. Sometimes they're fun, family run businesses. The most amount of tech that they use is like email. They still call people. And so they're not able to go online and actually reach a lot of these small businesses. So we traveled to Colombia to recruit manufacturers physically. We traveled to Japan to recruit manufacturers physically. It was a lot of manual work in the beginning, but once you actually develop those, I would say like once you have about 20 good users to start with, then network effects start kicking in because they know other people, they start referring other people, and it becomes less manual as you go on.
Hmm. And for the whole period of running Bambify, what were the main learnings now, looking back?
The biggest learning was that the market is the most important thing. I think that a lot of founders are told, hey, find a really hard problem that people are struggling with and fix that problem, and then you have $1 billion business. But that's not actually the case, right? You have to be in a massive market to hit that kind of scale. And the reality of what we were building is that small businesses who were doing manufacturing was very high churn. And it was a market with a lot of it was a market with a lot of torso and tail users. And these users tend to be small. These users tend to have lower revenue. And these users tend to be around for a shorter period of time just because they fail or they churn out or different things happen. And so, more than anything, I think the biggest learning is we focused way too much on the user problem and not enough on the market. And a really easy way to tell that you're doing this was we started off with one product, which is we are a marketplace for small businesses to connect with manufacturers. And then we quickly realized this product is not going to make us enough money to scale. So what do we have to do? We have to add on services. We thought about payments. We thought about let's create collaboration software. And as soon as you reach the point where you're like, okay, my current business isn't big enough, I need to add on services and then I will get big enough, that is a pretty good signal that the market you're in or the problem you're solving is not big.
Hmm. And like from my understanding, you also got into crypto or started thinking about crypto for the first time through this experience.
Yeah, that's right. Because our users were international. So we worked with small businesses in the US, UK, and Canada, and we worked with manufacturers in Asia, South America, and Europe. International commerce is very difficult when it comes to payments, and not actually for the obvious reasons that people think about. The obvious thing is that cross-border payments is hard, and the obvious thing is that foreign transactions are hard and expensive. But the less obvious thing is that there was a fundamental lack of trust when you are conducting international business. So, as an example, one of the industry standards when you just start working with a manufacturer for the first time is you pay 30% upfront and then you pay 70% when you receive the goods. And it's because as a small business, you don't know what kind of products you're getting back, so you don't want to pay the full amount. But as the manufacturer, you're making 100% of the products on 30% of the payments. And so it's a very bad situation on both sides. And the solution is lightweight escrow, right? The solution is escrow, but the margins are so thin in that industry that it's just not possible to introduce that layer of complexity. And so a lot of people just make that bet. So, because there was that lack of fundamental trust, and this was again in 2015 when Ethereum came on the scene, smart contracts came on the scene, we started thinking about what if we programmatically created escrow? What if the escrow was very, very cheap and you don't have to involve a third party? And so that lower margin businesses can use escrow very easily as well. So that was the first time I started looking into crypto specifically for that use case.
Hmm. And then how did you make transition from the founder to discovering electric?
Yeah, so when I dug into crypto at Bambify, the conclusion I came to is that this tech works in theory, but not in practice, and certainly not in manufacturing. The reason for that is the infrastructure is not there. Fiat on ramps and off ramps are not there. The regulations are not clear. KYC and AML are all very, very complicated and differ by country. And so when you're trying to create a cohesive international experience, that's just not possible. But, so once I decided to stop working on Bambify because it became clear that the market was not big enough, I kind of retained that curiosity about crypto because because the infrastructure can get there, and the infrastructure will get there. And if it does come to fruition, this is a massive market, and this is, this is in many ways like the new internet, and this is the new wave of how things are going to operate. And I felt very strongly about that. So I started looking into crypto and started looking into working in crypto, which is how I encountered Electric Capital.
Hmm. And what attracted you in terms of like joining Electric specifically?
Yeah, I would say Electric is very unique in two ways. The first is that everyone on the investment team is an operator or ex-entrepreneur or ex-founder. Avichal and Curtis, who are the founders of Electric, they've started and sold 4 different companies. The last one they sold to Facebook. So, operationally, the expertise is there. And for portfolio companies, that means that we're able to help out in that way, whether it's thinking through scaling or thinking through go to market or thinking through just the day-to-day issues that come up in running a business. But then also for me as an ex-founder, that was the type of environment I wanted to be in. And I truly believed in a VC firm that was going to be built by ex-founders, would be incredibly founder friendly, and would think differently in that way. So that was the first way that it was very different from anything else that I've seen. And the second way was different and kind of derivative of the fact that it was built by ex-founders is that the entire investment team is very technical. Everyone has a computer science background, and a lot of data and a lot of infrastructure we build in-house. And that to me was very exciting, because also a way for me to continue to build things, to build actual products.
Hmm. And so, what is your role there?
So there's a few things that I do. I'm on the investment team, so I look at early stage companies and I make a decision in terms of whether or not we should invest. This generally involves looking into myriad different industries. I run recruiting for Electric. I worked on the 2 developer reports that we put out. So, looking at developer activity inside the crypto space and really quantifying how many developers are there, et cetera.
Hmm. And so, how does your typical day look like?
So my time is split between looking at investments and doing analysis and helping build out the firm itself. Again, I think VCs are also businesses where you have to think about growth and sales funnels and how to the day to day of running that. And so that is part of my what occupies my time as well.
Hmm. Maybe we can touch also on GitHub developer research you did. So, what were some of the main learnings from this report?
Yeah, I think the takeaway in this report for me was that we published this report after 2017, and what we could see from the data is that a lot of developers came in the 2017 era, and then prices dropped 80-90%, but developers did not drop by nearly as much. And the way that we kind of gathered this data and the way that we did the research was, we indexed the entirety of crypto GitHub. We analyzed, which kind of at the time included 27,000 code repositories. We had to analyze over 22 million commits to figure out who the original code authors were. We looked across like over 3,000 crypto ecosystems. And the learnings that we had was that when you actually split up the developers by how often they contribute and how dedicated they are to the different projects, full-time developers actually increased despite market downturns. They increased by 13% year over year in June 2019 compared to 2018. And most of the developer loss came from developers that were kind of drive-by developers. So developers who came in and made one commit and disappeared, or developers who made a couple of commits, but not on a regular basis. So that was very exciting for us to see, because it means that builders are very active in the space. But I think the thing that was that people are kind of aware of, but that I think people in crypto should be aware of, is that it's still a small space. Despite the incredible number of projects and developer activity, the total number of developers is still small today. It's still less than 10,000.
How do you think we can bring more developers into the ecosystem overall? Is there like, because I noticed like A16Z did recently a little bit of a data analysis report with like Edgy, right, where they looked at kind of correlations between prices and like social media activity, PR activity, developers entering the space. Do you see something there, or do you think that maybe instead maybe like killer app or something like this will actually bring a lot more attention to the industry?
Yeah, I think there's 2 things. The first is that it's market driven. So, high BTC prices, high ETH prices will bring developers into the space. And what we've seen is that once they come into this space, the retention is actually pretty good. A lot of developers get really enamored in the industry and they stay and they continue to build very cool things. And then they become decorrelated from the market. So there's an initial correlation as the market grows, developers grow, and then there's kind of a decorrelation from there. So the first is just market dynamics will bring in more developers. And the second is as the tools become easier to use, as the languages become easier, more developers will come on board as well, right? And I think that's one of the really cool things that Near is doing is being able to engage with JavaScript developers through TypeScript. And so that, that I think is very key in bringing more developers on board and pulling in developers not already in the crypto space.
Yep. And to come back to like more like founder side of the perspective, how does experience in Electric also picture some of the things around, like maybe some of the things you were missing back in the day when you were first time founder?
Yeah, I learned a lot at Electric in just looking at early stage companies. And there were a lot of things that I learned that I wish I knew when I was starting my company the first time around. I think the first thing is a lot of founders are not capturing a market that exists today. So the thinking behind that is here's a market that's small today, but we think it might grow. And so we're going to service those customers. But, in reality, that market is still very small and it's still very like not usable. So a lot of founders aren't really thinking about the total market size and whether the growth can really sustain a big business in the future. And, I guess the other thing that I think about is whether founders are thinking about success metrics in the right way. A lot of founders are focused on vanity metrics like number of views or number of users or website visitors. And what people forget is that these metrics need to tie back to your core product in some way. If your core product is not driven by the number of views, then the number of views is really meaningless, right? And so just understanding exactly what it is, exactly what are the numbers, what are the drivers of your product. If this number goes up, then your product is successful. Like, what is that number, right? And then that is your success metric. And then go instrument that number and make sure that you know exactly what's going on there. I think maybe the other thing that's fairly specific to crypto is that the industry itself is just filled with really smart people. I think I'm always blown away by how incredibly intelligent everyone is. There are a lot of engineers, there are a lot of people who are just incredibly smart. And I think with that comes some baggage around being very philosophical around decentralization. I think anyone who's in this space believes in decentralization, but in order for crypto to garner more mainstream users, the realization that decentralization is not, people don't understand what that means. And so building a product where decentralization feeds into a good experience rather than, hey, this is decentralized, so it is better, so use us, is another key thing that I keep seeing. And then the last thing that's fairly crypto specific, I would say, is just monitoring and keeping a close eye on regulatory constraints. It's interesting because I think in traditional tech, there is this thing of like, do something first and then apologize later. It's trickier in crypto. It's trickier in crypto because it is under so much scrutiny. And actually, that is a thing that we think about a lot. And so what Electric has done in the past is bring in founders to talk to our portfolio companies who have dealt with navigating the regulatory space before, right? So, for example, we had Reid Hoffman come in and speak to our founders about what it meant to build his companies, like given the regulatory environment, and just focusing on making sure that regulatory constraint is not going to kill your business in the future.
Mm-hmm. And where do you see today also founders focusing? Do you see us in 2020 being in infrastructure phase still, or do you see a lot of interest in like pursuits of application layer of the Web3 space?
I see a lot of interesting pursuit of applications. So, not everyone believes this, but I think there's a minimum amount of infrastructure that needs to be built. And after that, it becomes an optimization and it no longer becomes a key driver. And I think we're at a stage where the minimum amount of infrastructure is more or less there. And so what I kind of see in the future is there's going to be applications that just bring in a huge amount of users that hit that product market fit. And once that happens, people will then go back and say, wow, our infrastructure sucks. This is very inefficient. Like, let's build some optimizations. But I think that killer use case needs to exist first. And I think we are starting to see the beginnings of that, whether in gaming, whether in collectibles or DeFi. I think you're starting to see a lot of excitement there and a lot of early usage. And I think what will happen is one or many of these things will hit product market fit. A lot of users will come into the space, and then infrastructure businesses will come in afterwards to make sure that everything is a little bit more efficient than the way that we're running things today.
Yep. And given that what you do today at Electric, imagine maybe yourself being first-time founder again. How would you go about kind of diving into the space? Given that the space is not the most approachable, how would you go about gathering information, synthesizing it?
I think there's two ways to very quickly and very successfully synthesize information. The first way is to ask all the stupid questions. So, questions that seem obvious, questions that you may be embarrassed to ask. A lot of people don't actually know the answers to some of these stupid questions. And I think asking that really clarifies things for people. I guess as an example, sometimes I will ask a company that I'm speaking to, why does this need to be decentralized? It seems like an obvious question, but I think sometimes people really flounder at answering that. And so part of my job is obviously going into different industries and gathering as much information as possible as part of the diligence process. And so I'm often entering into industries that I'm not familiar with. And so just don't be afraid to ask those stupid questions. And I think the second thing is just getting in the weeds and trying something out. As I mentioned, I think a lot of people are very research oriented and will kind of interview other people, will do a lot of digging on the internet, but the most effective way to learn something is just to do it yourself. And so I think that is another way. So just to kind of summarize, I think the way to synthesize information is ask a lot of dumb questions in the beginning. Don't feel embarrassed about doing that. And then just do the thing yourself and get into the weeds very quickly.
And how do you also think about talent matching for young founders? Maybe they might not have a balanced team yet. How would they go about finding founders usually? Is it like organic, like in your case, in your company, where your customer actually for the consulting part of the business became a co-founder? How do you think about that?
I would think about why you need a co founder in the first place. And I say that because I think co founder conflict is so common. And we have this perception that you have to bring on a co founder. And I think co founders are really good for two things. The first thing is they should be able to push you in ways that you can't push yourself. They should see things that you can't see, and they should really augment you, right? So, like, the two, like, finding that kind of co-founder soulmate means that you can actually produce 10x what you usually produce, not just producing 2x what you produce. And so like finding a good co-founder should be a multiplier, but that is really, really hard. And I think unless you find that person, a co-founder who doesn't do that for you could actually just be a liability. So, I think just don't settle. So if you can't find that perfect co-founder and, time is running short, I might even consider just being a solo founder. And the second good reason to get a co-founder is for emotional support. And I think that's very understated. Running a company is incredibly emotionally taxing. It's, sometimes you're like, you could just be like laughing 1 second and crying the next second, depending on how your customers are responding to you. And having a co founder who can share in that is important to some people, not to everyone. But I think, anyone who's looking for a co founder should think, hey, can I find that person who's going to make me 10x what I am today? And if I can't find that person, maybe don't settle, unless maybe you need someone for emotional support, which is also a real reason.
hmm And when you think about also skill sets that are missing in a space today, we talked a little bit about how it feels like a lot of teams are research biased versus, let's say, like product biased. Do you think we need more like strong product people or more repeat entrepreneurs in the space to kind of have better chances at succeeding at those killer applications?
Yeah, I definitely think so. And I think the industry is trending in the right way. I think in 2018, a lot of the companies that I spoke to, their pitch was, this is something that you're familiar with, but decentralized, and that is our product. And you don't see that much anymore. I think people are realizing that decentralization itself can't be the reason that people are using it. And so more and more, I do think product people are entering the space. I think people who are already in the space are starting to think about it from a how do we abstract away the blockchain aspect? Like, how do we just make this a very usable experience for people? So I think we are already kind of on that trend, and that's absolutely the right way to go.
And lastly, where should founders or otherwise people should look up information about Electric or yourself online?
Yeah, so they should visit our website. Our website is at electriccapital.com. We also have a YouTube channel where part of what we try to do is bridge, traditional tech with crypto. And so we'll have interviews with some of the tech giants that built the last wave of very successful companies. For example, one of the talks that we have is with John Lilly, the ex-CEO of Mozilla. And one of the things that we talk to him about is how do you build a thriving developer ecosystem? Because that's really applicable to a lot of crypto founders today. So we'll have a lot of videos there in terms of just talks that founders would find very helpful. They can follow us on Twitter. We're at Electric Capital. And we also publish a lot of our research that they can find on our website as well.
Yep, I should probably watch John Lilly's presentation, given that that's our main focus. Well, sounds good. Thank you for coming today.
Thanks so much for having me.
Thank you for listening. You can find more episodes of this podcast at openwebcollective.com. If you're a founder looking for help with either product, go-to-market, or fundraise, apply on the same website. It's openwebcollective.com. If you've really enjoyed this podcast episode today, please leave us a review on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or the platform of choice for you. And finally, if you're on Twitter, follow us. It's at openwebfounders. We'll see you next week.